Hi guys, I don't know. Let me know in the chat if you can see me. This is my first live, so it's going to be a fun test for all of us. Just want to make sure that everybody can see me and everybody's on. So just let me know in the chat. That would be fantastic. I'm just going to go ahead and put that in the chat and just make sure again that everything is flowing. I'm using Restream, so new to the platform and just trying to make sure that everything is flowing and looking right. And I'll hop onto YouTube and make sure I can see myself and make sure that it's all going. It looks like we're live. Yes, everybody can hear me and see me. Okay, fantastic. Thank you guys for showing up. This is going to be an experiment. Probably as you see a lot of people going live for the first time, just want to make sure the audio works, the visual works, and that we can get some of the questions answered today. So I have some questions that came in from my community. Thank you guys so much for letting me know it's working. But I'm also happy to have you guys start throwing questions up there. For anybody who showed up, I want to make real value of the time. So let's go ahead and, sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and stop that. Okay, so, you have your on-site next week. How can I help? What questions do you have for me? And I'm going to keep, thanks, Eirik, for checking in. Eirik was my safety net to just make sure everything was going okay. So, Trin, and I might be pronouncing your name incorrectly, you have on-sites next week. What questions can I answer for you? Okay, Gaurav, on-site interview for a test engineer role is Google. Is it different from a SWE interview? A little bit. So the big difference is just the absolute focus on testing. And so one of the things that you're going to want to be thinking about when you're going through the coding component is making sure you're testing your code. And obviously anything in the system design, anything attributed to open-ended questions, that testing piece, it's just going to be a consistent theme that they're looking for throughout your answers. And I really want always in these questions, right, for you to work with your recruiter as much as possible to figure out, hey, what makes sense? What are they going to focus on? But definitely when I think about test engineers and the few clients that I actually have had that have been test engineer clients, I've really just focused on that testing component. Lastly, when you're thinking about these testing roles, you really want to get into the weeds of what you did on your behavioral, how you tested it, who you tested it with, what were some of the failure points, what were some of the epiphanies you had, and just overall success points as you went through those testing components. I really hope that helps. Testing engineers, it's not going to be too different from a SWE, but I definitely want you to be checking in, obviously, with your recruiter. Your recruiter is always your best person, and it's always okay to ask them a ton of questions, really push and see what they'll give you, because if you do it in a really nice and gracious way, typically they will give you a lot of great feedback. Okay, so Trin, and just tell me if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So sales skills and how to prepare for the technical aspect. You have a breadth of knowledge, but lacking the depth. Only 1 year of professional experience. Okay, awesome. So let's start with the sales skills. So with the sales skills, that's all going to be about communication and collaboration. And so as you communicate and collaborate, it's just about asking great questions and putting that into the interview. In regards to only having 1 year of experience, the biggest item is to not get focused on it, not worry about it. They're obviously interviewing you for a reason. And so you just have to have confidence in your examples. And sometimes when you have only 1 year of experience, it's okay to go back to a college or university project. It's okay to definitely have a lot of focus on potential internships. That will really, really help you have success. And so I do get some clients that are more junior and they worry about it. And I will tell you, one of the big things for the entire audience is confidence is very, very key to success. And one of the only ways to have confidence is to truly prepare and practice. And if you always are taking those steps, you'll just feel a lot better about yourself. Self-belief when you go into these very tricky interviews at these very, very difficult to get hired at tech companies. I think we really need to get down to the foundation and base layer, and it all starts with confidence. It all starts with self-belief, because if you go in there feeling that way, it's really going to help. Trying to think of what else I can share with you. Breadth of knowledge, but lacking the depth. So this is going to also show up in a couple ways. So when you answer open-ended questions, what I want you to focus on is the simple layer. So if you're going to tackle a specific item, for example, you're going to tackle maybe 1 or 2 or 3 simple items. You don't have to go into a great amount of depth. And then depth on the behavioral side of things, I just want you to bring in enough detail into what you've done, but you don't have to go super deep into the detail. This will also help you call attention to what you've done, but it won't have to go into these layers that somebody who has 5 or 10 years of experience has. I really hope that helps. Okay, so next question coming in. Could you share your opinion about engineering manager overall? Eng manager. These are definitely fun roles. It depends on the organization and what the specificity of that eng manager role is. But 2 things I want you to be thinking about. 1, hands-on. You have to be able to jump in and code with your employees. So if you're managing them and you can't prove that you can be on the same level of them in the coding aspect, it's really going to be a challenge. They need your respect, and they need to know that, hey, when they're behind timeline, behind budget, that you can jump in and really get your hands and get dirty and get in there. The second piece is the leadership component. And so it can be challenging on the eng side to be a leader. So one of my clients recently just really highlighted some great areas. This is an eng manager client, and he just highlighted some great areas for how he had success with his employees. And it was really getting into the weeds as an eng manager. So starting with the architecture. How are you looking at the architecture? How are you looking at X, Y, Z? And so starting at a very, very simplistic layer as an eng manager can be really helpful to understand what your engineers' baseline coding skills are and just overall how you're going to develop, grow, and mentor them. I hope that helps. Experience-based questions for a product manager. What's the framework? Okay, so if any of you guys have seen my previous videos, I love GHBTRRSSS. It's goals and objectives, history, budget, timeline, resources, risk, scope and scale, stakeholders, and a shared vision. And so specifically on the product side, we really want to hedge a little bit more towards like value prop, market knowledge, just any sort of trending markets, any sort of trending data in the space. And then absolutely in your answers, you're going to want to start to talk about, or definitely be talking about, proof of concept, MVP, beta testing, all that kind of stuff is going to come a little bit more on the product side. It's where you're going to hedge just slightly away from a program manager, because ultimately you have to do all these items and then you have to launch, and kind of understanding, okay, is this just a software launch? Are we going to throw a launch party? Or what are the launch components? Those are some additional items that I've worked on with some of my product managers. Okay, next question. Asking questions for an open-ended GCA interview is definitely the way to go. How do I know I'm not overdoing it? Asking too many questions. Are there any cues that might be helpful? Okay, fantastic, fantastic question. So there's a couple of really critical points that I want you to be thinking about. One is the times that you pause, and secondly is absolutely the number of questions. So typically the way I like to start off with any GCA question or open-ended question, what we're going to do is we're going to look at let's call it 1 to 2 real questions. So, great question, Sue. Is this a new or existing program? Pause. See if Sue gives you anything back. Sue doesn't give you anything back. Sue, I really want to know if this is internal or external. The second that Sue doesn't give you an answer to that second pause, you do what I like to call the spin. And essentially all the spin is the spin becomes rhetorical thought process. You are spitting out probably 3, 4, 5 additional items. So those could be, is it sitting on the business and technical side? Am I aware? Do I know the goals and objectives? Is there historical data with this particular team, with this particular client? Okay, where else would I want to go with that? And then I think you hit those 4 or 5 questions and then you stop, because eventually you're going to have to go and start delivering that framework and answering the question. And yes, finding the balance can be really tricky. Now, if you get Jane, an interviewer, who is really interested in providing you with some data and information, then what you'll do there is you'll ask more questions. But still, I think that kind of 2 to 3 number, even if Jane asks, you don't want to annoy Jane, because it's really, really easy. The start and stops can be kind of polarizing. It can just kind of stop the flow of the conversation. So once you get into that flow, it becomes more of a back and forth and ebbs and flows. And then specifically what you want to do from those questions is you want to segue into that high-level framework. That high-level framework is really what's going to help you have success. I like to go open-ended, clarifying questions, and then hit them with my framework, and then ask that last follow-up question. So I'll hit them with all the components of GHBTRRSSS, and then I'll pause and I'll say, okay, Jane, based on those 9 concepts, are there any concepts you want me to focus on? 9 would be too many concepts to focus on the answer for an open-ended question. So I'd probably say, okay, based on this question, let's focus on resources, risk, and stakeholders. And then I go forward and I would start to dive in and answer the question. I hope that helps. It's extremely tricky to find the balance with those open-ended questions of how many questions to ask. The last really, really critical point, and I'm spending a lot of time because I think it's a really critical question, is as you're thinking through these open-ended questions, I'm trying to think of my point. Don't let the interviewer stop your flow. And so if you go in the plan with like, hey, as an open-ended question, I'm always going to answer like, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of my thought process here. If you say, I always want to go in and I'm going to ask like 2 or 3 questions always. And Jane, after your first question goes, I'm not answering any more of your questions. That's okay. Still have that plan, still have that agenda. You can still ask those questions as thought process, because you still need to think through it. And even if Jane thinks she's not going to answer your questions, she still might. It just depends on what you actually ask. So I know that was a very long answer. I hope that helps. What I'd love to do is if no new questions come in, then what I'd like to see. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to pop over there. So I'm going to start taking some more generic questions that came in from my community, and I'm hoping that some of these questions are very broad and touch on some interesting points for people. Okay, actually, I'll see this. Okay, any areas? Maybe I can start to show some of these questions. Maybe let me know if you think this helps to throw these in here. Okay, so any areas to adapt for a virtual onsite versus the actual onsite in the company office? Okay, awesome. This is a question that is absolutely top of mind for a lot of people. I think we start with that positivity place. And so I know that this is, again, always kind of a weird layer, a weird groundwork to start with, but let's talk through this for a minute. There are distinct advantages to a virtual onsite versus going physically there. First things first, you do not have to worry about any logistical challenges. The number one logistical challenge that you're going to overcome is you are going to be right next to your router. I am literally right next to my router right now so that we have good connectivity. So that's number one, be right next to your router. Number two, clean background. As you can see, I've kind of created this background where the light is coming in on my face, but you can't really see anything. So you're just kind of focused on me and hopefully on what I'm saying. And then third, and one of my favorites is a whiteboard. If you are going to be doing any sort of system design interviews or any interviews where you know you're going to have open-ended questions, i.e. interviewing for Google, for example, then you're really going to want to purchase a whiteboard. The cheap whiteboard on Amazon is like $8, or go to a local store if you can. If not, get creative, get a poster board, write it on a poster board. Obviously, I don't want to do that for environmental reasons. I would love for you to get a whiteboard, but the biggest thing with a whiteboard is understanding the setup. So two specific items to keep in mind with the whiteboard is, like right now I'm standing. What if you had 3 or 4 interviews and it was like 3 hours? You probably wouldn't want to stand for 3 hours. So you're literally going to want to be able to pick your laptop up and go to a position where you're seated, or a position where you're standing, or be able to flip your camera or whatever you're working with. It's going to be super, super helpful for you. I just love a whiteboard for anything open-ended. I can tell you in every single one of my open-ended questions that I got in every single Google interview, I was at the whiteboard. There's no reason why you can't translate that to home, but you definitely want to practice that setup with somebody else and make sure it looks really, really good. The last piece is notes. And so with notes, advantage of the virtual onsite or virtual, just Hangout or Meets or Zoom or Blue Jeans or whatever it is you can actually have notes. So when you're writing down the question, you could just be looking down at your framework. Now, if you're going to use notes, very, very simplistic, very, very easy. I don't want you to overwhelm yourself with notes. It can sometimes be really, really challenging. So let's quickly address the virtual onsite versus the actual onsite. As companies start to open back up, the biggest thing if you're going to be in person, it's all about body language and mirroring. Those are going to be your two critical keys. You're still going to want to mirror while you're on video as well. But if you're actually getting back on site, and I'm starting to hear some whispers of some companies looking to go back on site for interviews, then it's just all about your body language. Smiling, positivity, it's shoulders back. It's a real positive framework that you're creating if you're going to go on site. I hope that answer helps. Okay. Let's try this one. Dealing with ambiguity in layman's terms. Ooh, that's fun. Okay, so dealing with ambiguity is just the unknown. And so really, how do we figure out the unknown? We figure out the unknown in a few different ways. I think the biggest way we figure out the unknown is collaboration and question asking. So we just ask the basic, most general questions. And then when we're talking to Sue, Jane, or Bob, we're saying, who else should we be chatting with? Who else should we be talking with to get to this next step, to get to this next level? Because if we can figure out that baseline unknown by chatting with people, that's one way. The second way, data. Data is going to be super impactful for us to figure out information that we just don't have and don't know. And data could be a million different things. We could use like a SQL database to discover data. We could actually be coding to discover data. We could be surveying to discover data. So data is one component, collaboration is another. I hope that helps with dealing with ambiguity. It's figuring out what's unknown and not being scared by it, almost embracing it, being excited by it, and seeing it as the opportunity to problem solve. Okay, Oliver, have you seen interviewing processes change between very technical roles, engineers, and still technical? Okay, sorry, the question gets cut off. So let me reread this. Have you seen interviewing processes change between very technical roles, for example, engineers, and still technical but not as hands-on architects? seen interviewing process changes. There's not really, like, architects to me, architects are, it's a different kind of interview from an engineer. An engineer is going to be more hands-on coding, more system design, whereas an architect, when I think about an architect, I think a little bit more program manager. I think more like a little bit more collaboration, a little bit more working across teams. So I think it's a huge differentiator in terms of what are the skill sets that they look for in both roles. When I've had architects interview at companies like the Googles and Amazons of the world, it seems like it's a little bit more spread. And so I think that that's the big difference. If you want a follow-up question for that, Oliver, let me know. Okay, Eric. I've used micro interviews to explain concepts on the screen. Okay. Yes. Thanks for this comment, Eric. You can also use tools besides going to the whiteboard. As we mentioned, for virtual on-sites, you can definitely use tools as well. I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is ask your recruiter, ask your hiring manager, hey, what kinds of tools do you guys like to use for sharing? Given that we're doing virtual on-sites, are there any tools you like? Anything we can be using? And like Google might just use a simple doc sharing, for example, but a good question to ask, and then beforehand just kind of know, hey, if I wanted to use these tools during the interview, is that cool? Is that acceptable? Is that something that we would do, not do? It's just a good question to ask because you don't want to surprise your interviewer or upset your interviewer because they take a look at you using this platform and they're not very excited that you're doing it. Okay, next question. Christoph, thanks, Eric, for that. Christoph, great content. What would be your advice to get hired at Google? Sorry, you guys, again, this gets cut off. How did the whole process look like in your career? Okay, so let's make this a little bit more simplistic. And so the number one way I think to get hired at Google is by networking. If you don't have an in, like, of course, if you can get referred in, that's going to be your number one way to get in. You get referred in, they find you, somebody contacts you. That's what happened for me. Or you apply and obviously you get lucky and they notice you. The applying piece is hard. Google receives millions of applications a year, and I'm sure this is nothing you haven't heard before. So networking is the number one way to go about it. But if you're going to network in, you have to do two things. You have to give first. It's all giving articles, giving videos, not asking for anything. And then secondarily, it is a long-term strategy. It might really hit really fast. You might get some good feedback really early on, but the networking strategy should be, hey, Sue, came across your profile, see you're in program management. I found this really cool article on Fortune about the increase in hiring of program managers over the last 5 years. Hope to connect with you on LinkedIn, send the message, and hopefully that person gets back to you, and then you note it. And you go through an Excel spreadsheet. I did this video a few weeks ago showing this exercise, but that's what I would do, track everybody. And this was, when I got laid off in 2010, this was my approach. I put it in a spreadsheet and I followed everybody I reached out to. And it was a long-term strategy, and I gave. And ultimately what happened was I ended up having multiple job offers at the same time. The strategy works. Okay, now let's talk about the process. So I guess it was about 2 years ago, they switched on the process. So the initial call is almost always via phone. It used to always be via Hangout, what they're now calling Meet. And then from there, it's either a second phone call or Hangout, and then a slate of, right now, virtual on-sites, and what soon will probably be regular on-site interviews. How many interviews? Really, really depends. Sometimes for these customer engineers, sales engineers, they're going straight to virtual on-site where it's only 3 interviews, and that's all it is. Whereas for a technical program manager, you might have that introductory interview via phone and then have 5 on site. It does vary. The criteria is less is more. And I can give a little bit of historical context because I think it's super interesting for people to know. Urs Holtz, one of the first Google employees, he wrote this long white paper on the law of diminishing returns and essentially said, hey, at Google, we're over interviewing. More interviews doesn't yield better results. Again, law of diminishing returns. And so Google has done a really good job of interviewing less, but the process is extremely role specific. So I hope that helps. I know it's a super high level answer. If you want any additional context, throw another question in there for me. Okay. All right. Jeff, Google is, all right, I'm going to throw this question in there. How's it going? Jeff, Google subsidiaries using the same standards as Google. Great question. It's pretty similar. The standards are pretty similar. Because the interviewing information is kind of crossing across streams. Now they've really segmented and separated how they interview. And because I've been gone for a couple of years, honestly, I don't have the best insight into that. I mostly get clients for straight Google, not the bets. I've had a couple of clients who have been at the bets recently, but most of them are straight for Google. But I think at a baseline, the way I want you to look at it is same sort of complexity. You're going to get behavioral questions. You're going to get open-ended questions. They are separate processes, but I would want you to be thinking about the same amount of rigor, the same amount of difficulty. Because if you go in thinking, okay, I need to know how to create frameworks, I know how to structure my behavioral questions, which is going to be great for any interview. That's what's going to set you up for success. But they've really become independent of each other. When I was there, that split happened. Initially, it was all being done together, and then they split it off. So the bets really are interviewing in their own process, their own way. But I would imagine it's pretty similar. It was while I was there. Okay. Let me see here. Oliver. Okay. Awesome. All right, Hewitt. Let's see. I'm going to throw this question in here. It's going to get cut off again, so you guys, I'll read it. Completed my initial interviews 1 month ago for a tech PM role. My recruiter is looking for a team for me. Could you provide some advice on how to prep for the interview with the team manager? Okay, fantastic question. These fit calls are all about curiosity. And so let's just kind of, again, I think everybody who's watched me and seen any of my content knows I like to go to this really like baseline psychological level. One of the biggest keys when you're talking with a hiring manager in one of these fit calls is get them talking about themselves. Eventually, you are going to have to turn it and twist it and see what you can find out. But if they let you lead at all and ask if you have any questions, absolutely, Hewitt, you're going to need to strike on that. You're going to need to jump in and say, okay, the first thing I want to know is I want to know what are some of the things that you love the most about the position? What do you find to be uniquely challenging and exciting on a daily basis, et cetera, et cetera. Get them talking about what they love, what they think is challenging, what they think is fun. Get them talking a little bit about their background. And then eventually you're going to say, what are some of the unique and fun challenges that I might face in this role? Everything has a absolutely positive tone. I've heard of a lot of candidates kind of saying, oh, I heard this or I heard that. No negativity. Everything is absolutely positive. The other huge, huge key, do not run out of questions. I mean, I want you to go in with 20, 30, 40 questions. I want that half an hour call to go 45 minutes, an hour and a half. I want you to not allow that hiring manager to get off the phone. And at a couple points, you're just going to implement and say, hey, look, I love to ask questions. I'm curious by nature. So I came in with a ton of questions. I have a really long list. I'm going to keep asking them as long as you let me. And so you're kind of asking for permission, right? You're asking for permission to move forward, to keep asking questions. But that's absolutely the approach I would take. I can tell you, I would not let my GCA interviewer leave in my Google interview. And I know it's not directly correlated, but I just crushed him with questions. And we went from like a 45-minute interview to an hour and 15 minutes, to the point where somebody was like pounding on the door to get into our conference room. And so I know that that played in my favor, taking a real interest in them and their background. I hope that helps. Okay, let's go on to the next question. I think this one might get cut off too. Okay. What should a sales ops analyst expect in their on-site interview? Will they be tested heavily on the tools mentioned in their resume, as well as the Google JD? So one thing that I think I want everybody to understand, and this is Google, or specifically, it's not just Google, it's any company. I want you to imagine that your audience has never read your resume. They've never looked at it. They don't know anything about your background, and they're coming in cold. I want you to think more about the skills needed and the tools that are talked about in the job description. Because if you have X skill, but it doesn't really correlate to the job, it's not that important. So when I speak with my clients, I'm really not spending a lot of time on looking at their background, because it doesn't really matter. What really matters is that you can come in organized and structured and be able to talk about the specific tools that they mention in the job description. Now, if they have a tool in the job description and they say, hey, can you tell me about a time you've used Tableau? And you've never used Tableau, but you've used something similar, for example, you're going to say, Jane, it's a great question. I've used and learned a similar tool really quickly. I can talk to you a little bit more about how I've utilized that tool, how I've found great success with that tool. So it's less about your resume and more about what's in the job description. So I think it's a great question. Figure out what are the tools they use, and if you haven't used any of those tools, how have you used like tools, or how have you utilized a tool and learned it quickly? That's going to be two skills that are going to be critical. Hope that helps. Okay, Ira, best way to connect on LinkedIn is to send a message connection request connecting about your company name. Oh, okay. I've got a 35 to 40%. I'm sorry, I'll read this to everybody. This is from Ira, I found the best way to connect with anyone on LinkedIn is to send a message with the connection request connecting about your company name. I've got a 35 to 40% connection rate with that message. Keep in mind the vast majority of well-connected people are not as active on LinkedIn, or they get hundreds of requests. Imagines Jeff's LinkedIn requests. Great comment, Ira. So with LinkedIn, just remember that yes, your target audience is super, super inundated with requests, and sometimes those requests are extremely self-serving. They're just a give me, I need. And so when that happens, it's just hard for them to respond to everything. So as we go back to earlier in the conversation, I want you to first start by focusing on giving first, and then secondarily taking some of these tips and tricks from Ira, where you're just kind of implementing something new, something creative. So whether it's the company name or anything that's going to draw their attention that's a little bit different, because remember, on LinkedIn, people are so used to getting the same message. And so for me, for example, I get two messages all the time. And one of the messages is, hey, Jeff, I'm interviewing for X role. Like, can you send me questions? Can you tell me how to perform well? Can I do this? And I try to get back to everybody, but it's hard. It's difficult. And there are other things that candidly, I just need to prioritize a little bit more. And I feel bad about that, but that is just the reality. And then secondarily, for me, because I'm a business owner, I get tons of spam on, I can get you more leads, I can get you more clients. And it's all said in a different way, but it's very cookie cutter. So if you can just stand out a little bit, just think like Ira is talking about, personalize every single message. Take that extra minute to personalize. It will be so impactful. And like Iric, you will find something that really works for you. But I think entering the company name is great because it removes that little bit of a cookie cutter piece. Okay, and I'm just going to show that really quickly. This is what Iric is suggesting people do. Thanks for that. That's awesome. Okay. Okay, Trin. Okay, is it appropriate to ask for feedback at the end of your interviews while you're still in the interviewer's presence? No. And it's not there's really not a yes or no answer. The biggest time where you actually do want to ask for feedback is for sales roles. And not like a sales engineer role, like a straight up salesperson who has to come in and has to be a closer, then yeah, I think that's when it's appropriate. I've absolutely gone after sales roles where I've ended an interview that way. But for the most part, you are creating potential unease for your interviewer. That's all it is. You probably want to lower the risk a little bit. Now, if they've given you like 5 buying signs, like we can't wait to get you started, I'm going to be following up and telling the recruiter how great you are, okay, then you might want to go into that feedback loop and say, okay, yes, I would love a little bit of feedback on what I did well. And if you're really liking what I did, could I ask for any areas where I might have some growth opportunities, something that I could do a little bit better? Because then you're really, really going to win them over even more. But yeah, you just want to be a little bit careful because we have to be super unique and super original. But we also have to play this fine line of like knowing risk and like taking risks and not taking risk. And so I want to segue for a second because this is kind of building me over to another point. This is why typically in an interview, you only want to provide business examples and not personal examples. For almost all of us, we have personal accomplishments that are greater and more impactful than our business accomplishments, but you just don't know your audience that well. And so, yeah, you just want to play it safe. I think salespeople, yes. If you get tons of buying signs, then I think, yes, it's okay too. Hope that helps. Okay. All right, Iric, I'm throwing all your comments in here. This key is a novelty. It's short. They'll start asking questions. That's what you want to pique their interest. Okay. I often go blank during interviews, especially when I can't think of an answer. Any tips to overcome that? Okay, yes, absolutely. The biggest piece of advice that I like to give to my clients and just in general is I want you to take deep breaths. And as you hear the question, just take it in and breathe out. This literally settles our body. It settles our nerves. So you hear the question. I want you to breathe. I want you to write it down with a pen. Definitely pen and paper, not typing, not no writing. Write it down and then restate it. These 3 sets of breathing, writing it down, and restating it helps us reset. If you need a moment to think about it, tell your interviewer, Jane, great question. I'm going to just take a moment to think about it. Just breathe. Slow down. It's the urge, the need to jump into that answer right off the bat that really just, I think what it does is it creates a couple of different items. One, we start spitting out of control. We get super repetitive. We're not organized. We're not structured. And ultimately, our answers are a lot poorer because we didn't take the time. Now, secondarily, here's how you don't go blank. You prepare. I know that seems so basic, but if you have prepared 5 great behavioral examples, for instance, that are really flexible, fungible, you have edited them time and time and time again, and you've gotten them really good and you've practiced them multiple times, that's going to be really helpful. And then secondly, if you get an open-ended question, that's the number one freeze point for my clients. So if you get an open-ended question, you have to have some just really generic basic frameworks. And so even if we take my bigger framework, right, GHBTRRSSS, let's take 3 components that can absolutely be touched on in pretty much any open-ended question you'll ever face, which is goals and objectives, history, and stakeholders. Those are 3 items where you can always be, okay, well, in that question, I'd really want to know the goals and objectives. I'd want to know the history, and I want to know who I'm interacting with. If you can start with that baseline, then you can start to develop your answer. So practice those behavioral answers, get those open-ended frameworks, but more importantly, breathe, get to a real meditative, body settling state, and then write down the question and restate it. Those are going to be the tools that really set you up for success. And then Ira commented about, yes, blanking out is just, it's a product of us putting pressure on ourselves. And I can tell you, even coming into this live session, I was really nervous that it wouldn't go smoothly, that people wouldn't show up, that you wouldn't be able to hear me, that it wouldn't actually connect because I had never used it. And I just kind of sat down for a minute before I got on and I breathed and I was like, okay, well, the worst case scenario is it doesn't happen. And that's the way I want you to think about the interview. Like the worst case scenario is you just move on to the next thing. So why not just give it a shot, take a moment to collect your thoughts, and you'll do great. Great question. Okay, let's go to this next question. Okay, it's going to get cut off, so I'll read it. When it comes to phone screening, should an analyst expect behavioral or leadership questions at Google, or would that only be about starting your technical expertise? Have you had strange interactions? When it comes to phone screening, should an analyst expect behavioral or leadership questions at Google? So both. It's going to be both and your technical. So it's going to be leadership, behavioral, technical. I think when it comes to Google, the number one thing I want you to remember is it's about a 50-50 split. That's not great. Like it can hedge one way or another depending on your interviewers, depending on the day, but that's always the way I want you to be looking at it. And I want you to remove this piece of RRK, GCA, leadership googliness, remove it. The number one thing you can focus on is great behavioral examples and creating great frameworks. The rest of it, don't really concern yourself with it, because if you didn't know the actual focus area of your interview, you might not actually know what your interviewer was covering. But yes, expect everything. Have I had strange interactions? Sure. I mean, I think lots of people have had strange interactions with Google interviewers. And the reality is that when you have these weird interactions, when there's no ebbs and flows, you need to take control and say, Bob, I know and I feel like we're not having great connectivity. Is there any way that you want me to structure my answers differently? Any way that I could be providing more detail, less detail for you? Because if you have this really kind of like push and pull and it's not going well, you have to stop and reset. Because if you don't stop and reset, it's not going to correct itself on its own. So yes, weird interactions, sure. And I get this from clients all the time. Bad interviewers, upset interviewers, interviewers cutting the interview short. So you do what you can. Just know that interviews aren't perfect. And that's kind of the sad reality of it, is that it's not always going to be perfect. And you just got to do your best to navigate that landscape as much as you can. I hope that helps. Okay. What do you think is the most difficult part of GCA? This is an easy one. This is about structure and organization. And that's it. Really, people freak out about GCA interviews, and I understand. There's a lot to think about. So let's go through like a really, really simple exercise here for a second. So what I want you to think about is, instead of thinking about this very complex hypothetical or situational question, let's go back to the basics. How do you measure success? How do you determine risk? How do you present to leadership? Really, really, really basic questions. What are the most important components of data? because if those questions get expanded on, then specificity is only going to help you. So at its ground layer, and what I'm trying to get to is for any of those questions, frameworks. This is something that they do not teach internally at Google. This is something that I never taught, I never talked about. It literally just came from the repetition of talking to client after client that couldn't get organized. And I thought, well, if they just had this one little thing that they put together beforehand, and of course in my research, then I found, hey, I'm not the only one thinking this way. All the major consulting firms think this way, but I had never looked at it that way. And that guidance does not come from Google. So they're not expecting their candidates to come in with frameworks. So I would say 2 or 3. You have your one go-to framework. It just works for you every single time, and it's awesome. Then you have your customer framework, or you have your process framework, and they're nuanced and they're a little bit different, but they would fit the situations of the role. So frameworks, think role specific. So as a recruiter, I would want to be thinking about, okay, what do I do from a hiring process perspective when I'm working with candidates? What do I do when I'm working with a hiring manager? And then the third framework would be, how am I working on internal projects? Those would be my 3, for example. So I know that this is pretty long-winded, but frameworks are your safety net. If you go into a GCA interview and you have 2 or 3 frameworks, you know them backwards and forwards, you are going to implement one and you will instantly be better than about 75 to 80% of your competitors, because you will be structured, you'll be organized, you'll be providing the right level of detail, and you won't go down this like crazy repetitive path. It's just, we get unwieldy. We really kind of lose ourselves in these questions. And so if we stop, we really clarify the question, and then we utilize a framework, that's what success is going to look like. And that first point, you can't answer any of these questions without clarifying. It's just the expectation. So that's what I would want you to do. Great question. Thanks so much. Thanks for all the support. I appreciate it. Okay, next question. I am from South America, and let's suppose that I get the first interview and I do well on it. I'm going to have a following interviews on Hangouts. Yes, Francisco. That's likely the case, even if the next follow-up interview was just one interview and not a set of 2 or 3. For right now, everything is going to be done on Hangouts, or I guess they're like rebranding Hangouts and calling it just Meets now. But everything will be done on that platform. And I don't know the guidance for when they're going to come back and when they're going to do normal face-to-face interviews. I think we're all hoping for the same thing, to get back to normal, but doing it really, really safely. I think there are ways to bring people on site and do it safely. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there. But yeah, that's typically going to be the process. Like after a phone interview, having more phone, not quite as standard. And in 2018, it was late 2018, they switched from all first interviews being via video, being via Hangouts Meet, to being phone. I think it was a incredibly poor decision. There's so much value here. We just get a feeling for each other. We know when to pause, when to stop. Of course, I'm talking to myself right now, but it's much more responsive. It feels way more normal to be on video. So I don't know who gave that guidance. I really wish they would switch it back. The first interview being via Hangout or Meets was just awesome. So I don't know why they changed it, but yes, all future interactions should be via Hangouts. I hope that helps. Okay. You are welcome. Thank you so much for showing up. Okay. This is going to be a longer question, so I'll read this whole thing out. What frameworks should I learn specifically? I'm interviewing for the Google Cloud the CE role. Awesome. Google Cloud Customer Engineer role. So I'm aware of the Cloud Adoption Framework. Any other frameworks? Can you name a few? Okay, so the big thing with frameworks, and I think that this is a little bit confusing, is that Frameworks are your own. They're created by you. Now you can look at the Bain and McKinsey and go in and look at all the frameworks that they've created, but usually those are like, the level of complexity is just, it's pretty unnecessary. So when I think about a customer engineer for Google Cloud, I think that the GHBTRRSSS Framework is really, really good, because what you're trying to figure out is you're trying to figure out all these items, right, internally and externally. Now, could you remove like the budget piece? Yeah, you could probably remove the budget piece, but goals and objectives, history, knowing your timeline is absolutely critical. Knowing the resources, who's your resource at that client, at that customer, who's your internal resources who you're playing off of, what are the tools that you're using, what are the tools that they're using, right? What are the risks as a customer engineer of not getting this done for the cloud client? What's the overall scope and scale? Like, are they a small e-commerce company, or are they a large financial institution that's using hybrid cloud? And then, of course, any stakeholders. Stakeholders and resources is kind of interesting, because in resources, we can talk about stakeholders, SMEs, etc. But frameworks are going to be very, very individual to you. That's my go-to. Those are the items that I think about. There's likely a couple of different items that you think about as you think about being in that customer engineer role. And that could be quality or milestones or KPIs or any of these other items that I hear from clients. And I want you to take the path that makes the most sense for you. So there is no kind of like magical database of frameworks. And now that I'm saying that out loud, I feel like I could create something, but it should be really unique to you. I think you can build off of this baseline of, hey, there's a few items here that make sense, but yeah, you're just going to want to combine like what I've done, what you see online, and then personalize it a little bit. Because if you can bring in the combination of all three of these items, it's really going to help you have success. Awesome. Great question. Okay. What is the main difference between RRK and GCA interview? So there's a couple of differences. Again, I mentioned this earlier. One of the things that's really important is I just want you to remove the concept of one interview versus another. If you're going for your virtual on-sites, throw it all together, right? Just say it's all one interview. I don't care. I'm just going to do my best, because the reality is in a GCA or RRK interview, you can get behavioral questions and you can get open-ended questions. And yes, a GCA question can be a behavioral question. I got one. So I got, my question specifically was about enhancing an already complex project. And so I had to talk through it. There was tons of follow-up questions, tons of back and forth. We had really good ebbs and flows, but my RRK versus my GCA, you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. Now, of course, in a GCA, it's typically 2 questions where they're going to ask a lot of follow-up questions, but just expect open-ended behavioral. In RRK, I want you to expect a little bit more of that behavioral component, but you just have to be prepared for everything. They're not super different. I hope that helps. GCA, just think less questions, more follow-up questions, a little bit more back and forth. So if you go into that interview, just know that you want to have a little bit play back and forth with your interviewer a little bit more. I hope that helps. All right, let's pull up this next one. Does Google put more or less weight on any RRK, GCA, Googliness leadership interviews? Are they weighted equally? Fantastic question. It's equal. Yeah, there's one is not weighed more than another. And just so people are aware, the designations for how they do it, again, this was when I was there. I don't believe it's changed, but they're hiring recommendations. So it's not a scoring. They used to do scoring. Now it's just, they're kind of recommending whether they should hire you, not hire you, lean hire, strong hire. Those are some of the fields that they look at. So it's a much better way to do it. So you're just getting somebody's overall feel, vibe for whether they should hire you or not using some arbitrary number that is scaled totally different by different people. I hope that helps. Okay, this one's going to get cut off. So I've had rejections for 2 final round interviews at Google, although the recruiter mentioned that the feedback was positive. Can I try again, or have I blown my opportunities? Absolutely, you can try again. Hands down. Definitely try again. If your recruiter is giving you that, they're telling you that for a reason. Many of the people that I hired when I hired candidates there, I hired them when they were going through their second or third iteration. It's hard to get in the first time. And so just remember, yes, and positive data sticks with you. It's an internal CRM, so they're going to see it. And if it is positive, they're going to be more likely to reach out to you. So great question. Keep trying. Don't stop trying. It's great. Okay, Christoph, I always wonder why you left Google if this is one of the most desired companies in the world. Great. I did do a quick video on this. I'll highlight 2 major items. The number one item was I felt like I could have more impact working for myself, and I truly believe that that's what's happening right now. I know Google holistically impacts billions of people, and I get that, but I think this personal interaction that I can have with this kind of audience is amazing, and obviously the flexibility. I can live wherever, my wife and I can go and be wherever we want to be, and that to me was really important. And then lastly, like I just needed change in behavior. And so when I left, I needed to really reflect on what was important to me and take ownership and responsibility for everything in my life. And that was important too. That's a whole other story, but great question. Okay, so Bilal, thank you for watching the videos. I got a job at Google. Okay, amazing, awesome. So happy to see that. You tried 5 times before you got the role. Okay, really great. Sometimes it just takes a bunch of times to get it. So don't give up. Live your dream. Like if Google or any of these companies, any company in the world is your dream, just don't give up. Believe in yourself. You got it. You just got to put the time and effort into preparing and practicing. That's what it's all about. So thank you so much for that comment. That's awesome. Keep trying, please. Do you mind spelling your framework again slowly or post in the chat? Thank you. Yes, let's go through that. This is going to be the final question. I'm gonna end here. Thank you guys so much for hopping on. So HBTR, sorry, now I'm losing track of it. GHBTRRSSS. So history, goals and objectives, budget, timeline, resources, risk, scope and scale, stakeholders, and shared vision. You can also visit my program manager framework video where I outline it for you. All right, just discovered your channel, looking for some program manager since this is what I'm heading for. Great content. You are the best. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm going to end on that note. Thank you guys so much. So amazing. Yeah, I just genuinely appreciate all of you so much, and thank you. Take care. If you guys let me know in the YouTube community if you want me to keep doing this, and I will. Thanks.